is August 22nd, 2025, and Iran is now warning that if Israel and the US attack once again, that this time Iran's response will be even more lethal, that this time they will be using more advanced missiles. Don't look at the missiles from a decade ago. No, this time they are going to keep turning up the pressure on Israel and on the US because, as we've seen Iran note, every single time it retaliates, those attacks continue to get harsher. And yet, the US and Israel have shown no indication that they are planning to pursue any kind of peace with Iran. So, what should we be keeping an eye on moving forward when it comes to the latest tensions? And what about the Iranian president's visit this week to Armenia to talk about this new corridor named after Trump that is in the proposed deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan? How does that play a role in the ongoing tensions? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based geopolitical analyst and host of Political Aficionado. Ehsan, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for inviting me to your show.
Yeah, it's always good to have you. And I know it's been an interesting few weeks as we have kind of been in what feels like a calm before the next storm. It has been 2 months since Israel and the US launched this so-called 12-day war on Iran. And now you have Tehran's defense minister warning that, quote, we have manufactured and possess missiles with far greater capabilities than previous missiles, and if the Zionist enemy embarks on the adventure again, we will undoubtedly use them. So, what do we know about these missiles, and how do you view this renewed warning coming from Iran?
Well, you have to know what he's talking about. He's not referring to any new breakthrough, because if that was his intention, then still the process of mass producing those missiles or semi-mass producing those missiles. So that's not what he means. There was no new breakthrough. I mean, he's not referring to the new breakthroughs. What he's talking about is the fact that Iran used most of the missiles that Iran used in what the Westerners call 12-day war. We call it the second imposed war. The first one was the invasion of Saddam's invasion of Iran. Most of the missiles that Iran used in the second imposed war were actually produced 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. We're talking about 2014, 2015, because the Iranian calendar doesn't quite match the Gregorian calendar that the Western world uses. 2014, 2015 missiles, and some of the missiles that Iran used were also produced in 2018, 2019. So the missiles that were produced after 2019, or some of the missiles that were produced between 2014 and 2019, some of these missiles weren't used. The most notable missiles that I can bring to the attention of your audience is Fatah 2 missile, for example. Fatah 2 is a hypersonic cruise missile, as opposed to Fatah 1, which is a hypersonic glide body missile. When Fatah 1 came out, many people said that it's not hypersonic, and that's because of a particular kind of viewpoint and perspective that they have. There are different definitions available of hypersonic missile. First, we have to note that when we talk about hypersonic missile, we are not talking about just the hypersonic speed. Anything that moves past 5 Mach, 5 times the speed of sound, moves in a hypersonic regime. But that's not the only characteristic of a hypersonic missile. Based on the source that you use, the definition that you use, for example, Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance defines a hypersonic missile as a missile that moves past the hypersonic speed, but also capable of moving and maneuvering through the entirety of its trajectory. The definition that one of the distinguished Russian military missile academies use is a little bit and slightly different to that of definition. So based on the fact that which analysis you use, people might have a different perception of what this missile is. What it is that it's a very fast missile. We're referring to Fatah 1, and it is still relevant to talk about that missile because it was used in much fewer numbers than the other missiles that were used, and because of the fact that it also helps us understand what Fatah 2 is. So Fatah 1, because of the shape of its warhead, it's actually much easier to produce than the hypersonic glide vehicle. Please pay attention to the wording. I refer to the Fatah 1 as hypersonic glide body missile and other missiles as hypersonic glide body. Because of the fact that it doesn't have a wedged head, it can perform more evasive maneuvers. So in terms of performing maneuvers, it can perform much more evasive maneuvers than that of a wedged head. But the trade-off here is the fact that it doesn't maneuver through the entirety of its trajectory. It performs maneuver through most of its trajectory, or in this particular intervals, these windows that are succeeded by the sort of interval of moving on a predetermined path. The trade-off isn't just limited to that. Fatah 1, because of the shape of its warhead, is more economically cost-friendly. So that's also an advantage, which makes it easier to manufacture. Now, in response to those who were dismissing Fatah 1, you have Fatah 2, which has that wedged warhead that everyone is talking about and are so infatuated with. So it has that wedged body, and it can maneuver throughout all of its trajectory. So that's a very huge point. We haven't, unfortunately, I mean, it's very hard for you to get your hands on the telemetry data, but I haven't seen them exactly, but theoretically it can be used as an invaluable asset in order to suppress the enemy air defense systems. But that's not just all. There's also Rezvan missile that wasn't used, and Jihad missile. Jihad missile has a lower range, but I'm counting on the fact that Iran has this tendency of manufacturing different versions of the same missiles with different range and different capacity. So something similar to Zangezur. People didn't really know about Zangezur 2. We became aware of that during the second imposed war, when Iran actually used it. So similar thing can happen with Jihad. And again, you have Rezvan, which is one of the Iranian liquid fuel propelled missiles that has the range and the capacity to reach Israel. So these are the missiles that Iran has and it hasn't still used. There is also this missile that is talked about in circles of the military analysts inside Iran called Khorramshahr 3. But the data on that is unclear. People don't, like some people, not ordinary people who are not really into these kind of stuff, they don't question why was it the case that we immediately went from Khorramshahr 1 missile to Khorramshahr 4? What happened to, for example, Khorramshahr 3? From the things that are being whispered in the military analyst circles, that's a very powerful missile that can be used. What I can say about the escalation is that if Iran uses more Khorramshahr 4 missile or possibly even Khorramshahr 3 missiles, if you remember, during the late days of war, there was a missile used that the Israelis said dealt damage to 26 or seven different buildings. That was Khorramshahr 4. So, and it was used in a very limited number because Iran just didn't want to escalate to that extent. So they still are very much big factors that Iran can escalate, use in order to escalate. Apart from that, because of the fact that I'm seeing so many rumors circulating online, for example, Prime Minister of the fake entity said they have destroyed 50% of the Iranian missile launchers. Some sources that they have destroyed 50% of the Iranian ballistic missile stockpile. These are not true. They say that Iran launched the bulk of its missiles. That's also not true. I'm not going to give people the specific rate of production of some of these missiles. It depends on the time and the specific need of the Iranian government. But what I can say to give people a frame of reference and a ballpark is the fact that Iran used less than 2 months worth of production of missiles. And considering the fact that we're talking about missiles that were produced in 2014, you can do the calculus and know how big of an arsenal the Iranian missile is.
Wow, that is a very in-depth explanation, and I really do appreciate that because it's something you just don't see in the West. The media reports that I've seen, of course, they are taking the statements and then taking the version of it, and then they're taking what Israel has to say and kind of presenting that to the public, but that's good to know. And, we see these warnings coming out now, and as you were noting there, Iran did not want to escalate, right? They were in a position of like, look, we don't want this to go further than it already has. They're once again putting out these warnings, but do you think that Iran's warnings will be enough, or are the US and Israel already planning their next attack? And should we be concerned about how much tensions could escalate in this next round? Because it feels as though there is certainly going to be a next round.
Well, had the Iranian warnings been sufficient, we wouldn't find ourselves in the current circumstance, would we? So, and from where I stand, I see these warnings as continuation of a failed policy. Back then, between the period of Operation True Promise 2 to Operation, not Operation True Promise 2, after the attack of Israel in October 2024 on Iran and the start of war in this period, the Iranian military generals were going around and unveiling missile cities. That's the term that they use in order to convey the fact that these missile bases that we are talking about are so big. They call them missile cities. But that didn't do well, did they? So from where I stand, Israel, this is not a deterrence. These words, these statements are not going to deter Israel. And unfortunately, that has a sort of, it goes beyond simple art of statement making or something like that. It has a deeper meaning. Because of the way that Iran escalates, Iran's pattern of escalation management is an incremental one, meaning that they increase tension very, very gradually and on a step-by-step basis. That is something that the Israelis just simply don't understand. After Operation True Promise 1, I explained how that was a warning shot to Israel. Many people dismissed it. After Operation True Promise 2, when the rate of interception of the Israeli regime decreased and more Iranian missiles got through, people saw that, yes, there was some truth to that statement, that it was a warning shot. But because of the fact that Iran missed hitting, for example, F-35 hangars or things of that nature, they said, okay, so you have missiles that are fast enough to get through the air defense systems of the Israeli regime. But still, you don't have the kind of precision that you claim. I explained how that was a fallacy, and we actually failed because of political decision making, because of this unwillingness to inflict a kind of damage that might bring us to war, which wouldn't. I mean, it. Ironically enough, if had they showcased the precision of the Iranian missiles back then, things might have changed. But they didn't do so because constantly in the book of the current Iranian politicians, the way to prevent war from happening, chapter 1, appeasement. There is no chapter 2. And unfortunately, this doesn't work well for Iran. So the war happened, and we saw scenes that were really remarkable. For example, in one instance, an Iranian missile took out a single air defense battery inside the heart of Tel Aviv. You tell me how a country can target a single air defense battery, but somehow it is incapable of hitting F-35 hangars in Nevatim Air Base. This goes and corroborates the first hypothesis that we had, that it is unfortunately due to bad political decision making. But going further and talking about US and Israel getting ready to sort of attack Iran, unfortunately the Israelis are relentless, which is, I mean, good for their objective. A politician should be relentless in pursuing their objectives. And, you know, as a person who has been constantly disappointed by the kind of politician who have this mentality of, oh no, it can't be done, we're doomed for failure, this defeatist mentality, it doesn't serve you well. So they're gonna surely come back. Following the attack that they carried out on Iran on October 2024, they immediately, a month after that, started working on attacking on Iran. How do I know this? Because there's a Hebrew article published on Israeli N12 Hebrew outlet that actually talks about this. A team by the name of X was formed, and from the very first, from November of that year, they started working on plans to attack Iran. One of the major reasons was that Iran didn't retaliate, right? And when that circumstance happened, they actually, I think a few months after that, they started setting up their connections with the American officials. And I think for 3 or 4 months, there were these high-level meetings that were being held between, for example, Prime Minister of the fake entity, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Donald Trump, the US President. Ron Dremer was actually in contact with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. And Israel Katz was providing the plans in order to attack Iran. So they're relentless. And let me say this, in terms of operation security, they actually did a very good job of hiding these details. Because even after the war, not many people know about Team X. And they don't know that this high-level meetings were being carried out 3 to 4 times a week for 3 months between the US officials and the Israeli officials, and for 6 or 7 months amongst the Israelis themselves. So they were very good at operation security. I think that the people should be more cognizant of the kind of preparations that Israel is doing in terms of the logistics. For example, just a few days after the war, like a couple of days after the war, 128 ton of munition from Germany was flown to Nevatim Air Base in Israel. 3,800 kits are supposed to be delivered to Israel to use for its Blue 109, -109, if I remember correctly, bombs. 3,200 ton of, uh, by the way, the blue bombs that we were talking about, they're like 50, 500 ton, uh, apologies, 5,000 ton bunker busters, pound. So these are big bombs. They are being armed with guidance, very advanced guidance kits, and there are 3,200 ton of guidance kits that are being also delivered to Israel in order to use for other munitions. I think 500 pound, five 500 pound bombs, and so these steps, these preparations are being done. I think that people can't really wait for the political signals, as oftentimes seem to be the case with people. They wait for the political signs, for the statements, for the threats. I think that those indications can't be used as a reliable source in order to predict the future, because of the fact that we know that Team X was holding these high level talks, but unfortunately, right before the attack of Israel on Iran, Donald Trump said that he's not going to leave the negotiation table. So there was also an element of deception from the political structure that was used from until the very last moment of the war, which had a very ambitious goal to overthrow the Iranian government. Until the final moments, they abided by the protocols of Operation Security. So I think that Iran should set its default presumption that a war will happen. Fortunately, that seems to be the case. Rahim Safavi, the Iranian general, has made some good comments. For example, Iran should change its strategy from a reactive defensive paradigm to the more aggressive offensive paradigm. To what extent they're going to do this, I don't know, but that can even be used, if wisely, to prevent the war from happening, considering the fact that I think the midterm elections in the United States are going to happen in April of next year. And we know that they at least need to take to have a campaign that would last for a month and a half, 2 months, at least a month and a half, like 40 days, 45 days. That campaign needs to be going as the second stage of the war. So potentially, if Iran can get ahead of them, because of the deadline that they have and the time period before that, the United States president and its ruling party needs in order to calm the situation, presumably make the market more stable with regards to oil price. If you imagine that they need 2 months for that, and then you consider that a month and a half time period is needed in order to carry out that second phase of the war against Iran, then potentially they are in a race against time, and Iran, by carrying out aggressive, offensive, covert operations, can hypothetically prevent that from happening. But unfortunately, to be honest, I'm not really optimistic about these people thinking about something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great point, and I think it's interesting because, to factor in the midterm elections, to factor in sort of the political climate in the US, I do think is a legitimate thing to keep in mind. And yeah, exactly as you're pointing it out there, it's like, okay, Iran has been on the defensive, right? They've been the ones that say, hey, we don't want war, we're open to talks, let's have some sort of a talk. Well, Trump told you he will hold talks. He will tell you we're going to have another meeting on Saturday, and then he will be directly involved in an attack against you, and then he's going to go on and brag about it. So Yeah, a lot for Iran to hopefully learn from the first time around. Now, some other places where there is some deception, or maybe at least an attempt at it. I thought it was interesting that Iran's president visited Armenia this week, where he was assured that everything is fine after Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a deal brokered by the US earlier this month that will create the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, a corridor that would give the US access to a portion of Iran's border. Now, the focus in the media has been all on this deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, claiming that Trump is somehow bringing peace. But what are your concerns for this route and how it could be used to further threaten Iran's national security?
First of all, there is an article, if I remember correctly, by Economist that states that the the deal hasn't gone through fully, and they have just wrote the Prime Minister of Azerbaijan and Armenia. They have just wrote their first initials on those papers. They haven't signed those articles, those deal, that deal. So, like, it's not a done deal. But unfortunately, but the situation that I can draw an analogy to is like, well, for example, a person having a first stage cancer, right? And he would say, I'm not gonna start the treatment. I'm gonna allow it to develop to fifth stage cancer. And then once the cancer cells metastasize and spread into other organs, I'm gonna start uh, treating myself, start the treatment process. The Iranian politician Ali Akbar Velayati has stated that with or without Russia, they are going to prevent this corridor from being established. Again, unfortunately, as I mentioned, the Iranian analysts, the sort of bright minds of Iran, they were warning about this. But unfortunately, their warnings were neglected by these people. Ali Akbar Velayati is the same person who, after the fall of the Assad government in Syria, said that we didn't think that Turkey would betray us. Well, your thinking didn't do you well, Mr. Velayati, did it? Uh, your ignorance, your ego, cost the axis of resistance a very important logistic route. I don't know if that person is reformed. Ego is something very hard to treat. I should know I'm dealing with that, unfortunately. But this pride, this vanity that these people have in them is the problem. Now, going a little bit closer to the core of your question, the Iranian president, he made the statements, I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, that maybe it was even before that, but he made the statement that if we have good relationship with our neighboring countries, we don't have to be worried about these minor things that are happening in northwestern parts of Iran, referring to the changes in border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Quite a lot of things to unpack there. No, Mr. President, it's not a minor thing. It's not a minor thing at all. And we have good relation. We try to do our best in order to have good relationship with both Turkey and Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, the other party doesn't want to do so. Azerbaijani airspace was used in order to carry out attacks on Iran. And it was actually not the first time. Former minister in Israeli cabinet, I forgot, I'm blanking on his name, but he said that Azerbaijan was used in order to steal the Iranian nuclear documents, confidential Iranian nuclear documents. The Azerbaijani airspace has been used in order to fly drones into the Iranian territories and bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities. It was also used in the second imposed war against Iran. So the other party is not interested in, de-escalating or having good relationship. Now, he made another statement in another place that Azerbaijanis are from us. We are from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is from us. We are from the same tribe. That wasn't a very good comment, because when you bring tribes up, because of the fact that you're Azeri and Azerbaijan is made of Azeris in the Baku regime, people are going to think that you're actually prioritizing your ethnicity to the national interest of the Iranians. That doesn't make people feel safe, that their national security is in the hand of a person who could be trusted. But it's also it also irks me in another day, in a different way. When I see the American students paying the price of supporting the Palestinian cause, despite the fact that they have been propagandized to hell and back, but they're willing to make a stand, and under such sort of echo chamber that has been created by the Western mainstream media, and the kind of censorship that they don't have access to, opinions from the other side. Despite that, students in Ivy League schools jeopardizing their future in order to make a stand, then I can't possibly understand how the Iranian president thinks that, because he actually said this: it is our fault that Azerbaijanis are going and becoming closer to the Israelis. When he puts the blame on we, the Iranians, Iran, it rubs me the wrong way, because of what I just explained, that somehow the American youth could break free from that propaganda, but an entire nation, a state, couldn't do the same thing. They could jeopardize their future. You couldn't do so. And I look at a person like you, even. Like, you must have gone through a lot working for RT, Sputnik, or other outlets. But somehow you took a stand. The fault of others can't be placed on the shoulders of a third party. It's just something that can't be done. But it seems that, again, like mentioning that that the statement by the Iranian president, how he thinks that it's a tribal thing, how he thinks that it is our fault, it just doesn't sit well with me. But even moving past that, explaining, because the bulk of the issue should be put on why it's not a minor thing. Let me take you back in history. During the Pahlavi dynasty, the first king of Iran felt generous. So he actually gave away this part of the Iranian land to the Turkey. This part of the land that I'm referring to is a land that was placed between Nakhchivan, which is an Azerbaijani exclave, and Turkey. Turkey said that, oh, we want to have access to our kin. Turkey is made up of Turks. Azeris are also Turkic people, so in a broader sense, they belong to one family of ethnicity. So they said that we want to be close to our kin, and that Iranian king, the first king of Pahlavi dynasty, may God never forgive him, because he has created this mess in South Caucasus. He did that. He gave away that land to them. But as we now know, it didn't end back there, did it? Because Azerbaijan is making new demands. It says now we need an access to our exclave, right? So what does that leave Armenia with? Because if you occupy that territory, then the same situation would be created for the Armenians. Azerbaijan, unfortunately, is a lot influenced by the Israelis. The articles on that are very, very much abundant. 100 Israeli startups are operating inside Azerbaijan. 40% of the Israeli fuel is provided by Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is receiving 70% of its arms from Israel. There are no shortage of data that you can put out there to show the collaboration and cooperation between these two regimes. But that was not everything that they learned from the Israelis. They learned other things as well. In a similar fashion, that the Israelis claim that because they have found a coin in a particular place, it is then through their archaeological excavations, they claim that that land belongs to them. Azerbaijanis have a similar method. They say there's a mosque in Armenia. They're not Muslims. They're Christians. They're Armenians. They're Christians. So who built that mosque? The Muslims. We are the Muslims. And that obviously shows that we have a claim over that piece of land. And that's not all. They also refer to the two provinces of Iran as South Azerbaijan. The Baku regime has a claim, territorial claim over Iranian land. That's what they do. So considering that they are going to sort of unite and establish this route between Azerbaijan, sort of proper, and Nakhchivan and Turkey, it would, and if, God forbid, these countries form sort of like a state union, the like of Belarus and Russia, then we will be completely encroached by a state union, one of its members is Turkey, which is a NATO member. The other one has extensive relation with the Israeli regime, whose land was used in order to carry out an attack on Iran. It even is worsened if you understand what the Caspian transit corridor is, but I leave that to another time and another place because of the time of the show. So this is not a good situation at all. Considering what happened in Syria, you can't say that if we have a good friendly relationship with them, this negligence is unacceptable. This situation that I just explained, it might have been the worst case scenario, but pretty soon, if this naivety and this simple-minded mentality continue, this might be very well what we find, the situation that we find ourselves in, considering the expansionist nature of Turkey and Azerbaijan, the greater Ottoman Empire, which is similar to the greater Israeli project, the new Ottoman Empire, that they want to establish. When you are faced with such expansionist countries, naivety is like a fatal venom, but it unfortunately has poisoned the minds of the Iranian politicians, and there seems to be no cure potent enough in order to cure them of that delusion.
Wow. And you look at these Iranian politicians and you go, okay, Israel, the US, they've all shown you that they will attack you. They will attack you from inside your own country, and that they will stop at nothing to continue to prolong what is an ongoing war, even as we are kind of in this period looking around and going, okay, what is the next phase of this going to look like? I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate your in-depth analysis today and you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based geopolitical analyst and host of Political Aficionado, thank you so much for your time and insight.
It was a pleasure to be on your show.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.